Can't lose weight? Can't sleep? No energy? Well, welcome to America, sort of. When it comes to blood sugar, there are several ways to look at it. Most of us have had a fasting glucose run, or an A1C, or some of us both. But really, what does this tell us? What do they mean? And there are other ways to find out what your blood sugar is really doing and how it's working. Well, the answer is yes. The initial problem is, if you're working with your practitioner, do they know this, and are you able to convince him if they don't otherwise? The second issue is, what do you do with the information? I bring this up because about half of all Americans are either pre-diabetic or diabetic, and about half of the remaining have some form of what's called dysglycemia, meaning their blood sugar is too high or too low. It varies. That's probably close to almost everybody you know. So why isn't this mainstream news? Well, probably because it doesn't kill less than 0.2% of the population, but yet leaves another 30% disabled to some degree, like some virus you know of. But sugar dysfunction destroys more life than diseases, famine, and wars combined. As I've been going through this 5-part series, this is part 1, I'll have some definitions for you. Number 1, low blood sugar, otherwise known as hypoglycemia. High blood sugar, known as hyperglycemia. Hemoglobin A1C is the percentage of blood sugar, the percentage of that sugar attached to your red blood cells as a percentage. Above 6.5 is considered diabetic. Pre-diabetic is 5.7 to 6.5-ish. I'll explain that later. And it's literally average over the past 3 months. It can be up to 6 months. It does not take into account the highs and the lows for glucose during the day, or how insulin performs, or how your cell actually make energy in something known as the mitochondria. The most common test, glucose, is a snapshot in time. Perfect is 85 to 99 as a reference range, but you can get this from a finger stick or a venous draw, or from a continuous glucose monitor, one of my favorites. But if you get scared, you get sick, you work out, or you don't work out, you eat too much, or you eat pretty much anything, your glucose numbers will change fairly quickly. Some foods it changes faster, and some foods it changes slower. And even if it goes up in the morning, sometimes it's called a cortisol awakening response. It doesn't mean you're immediately diabetic. This too gets very tricky when you're fasting, and yet it still can come up high with a cortisol awakening response in the morning on a glucose test. Also, when you eat, your blood sugar can surge well beyond what's considered diabetic numbers, when it's considered a glucose number, well over 150, possibly 200. Yet, this is really actually a normal thing, and we expect it to be back to normal within 85 to 99 within a few hours. Blood sugar regulation, part 2. Insulin is a wonderful marker, and its job is to take glucose and push it into your cells to make fuel or energy. If glucose is wandering around without any direction, it's the equivalent of giving a toddler a cappuccino and a puppy. Sure, it's fantastic to watch for about 5 minutes, and then all hell breaks loose. So if your blood sugar is too high or too low, you have symptoms of sweats, dizziness, fatigue, brain fog. You just feel like junk. Insulin is also a hormone that is elevated and can sometimes show inflammation. Your ideal range for insulin is around 5 or below, and around 10-ish, your pancreas is showing that it's working overtime, and then around 20, it tells you that your pancreas is essentially pooped out, and there's a condition that's called insulin resistance. Unfortunately, I haven't found a lab where the reference range really isn't under 20. Why? It's because of the current health of the United States population. Normal isn't unfortunately that healthy. Reference range have to meet the population to avoid a catastrophic crash when medical debt or crashing the medical system. That's a topic for another day. Insulin resistance is when the cells do not react to the insulin that's delivering their glucose to them via the blood. The causes for this are numerous. Sometimes there's a problem with the receptor, like the receptor on the cell can't accept it. Something like a key to a lock. You got the wrong key, or the key changed, or you dropped it and broke something. Sometimes it's an issue with the signaling pathway. So to make up for inefficient insulin, the pancreas produces more of it. As long as there's an amount of insulin that's available to the cells and it's sufficient to compensate for its weak response, blood sugar levels will stay in the normal range. But you're buying time. The pancreas usually cannot maintain this state of increased insulin production for that long. So when this happens, there will be a lot of insulin and sugar in the blood, and then they can't get consumed by the cells. So this is considered persistent hyperglycemia. There's high blood sugar levels. And it has very well-known harmful effects such as diabetes and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. With your insulin, you can calculate something called HOMA-IR. This stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment for Insulin Resistance. And again, insulin resistance means your body can no longer efficiently and adequately use insulin. Your pancreas is putting out more, but your blood sugar is no longer staying below 100 when you're fasting. A good HOMA-IR score is less than 1.5. Here's how you calculate it. You take your fasting insulin that you get from the lab and you multiply it by the fasting glucose. So let's say your fasting glucose was 100 and your insulin was 10. so 10 times 100. Then you divide that number by 405. So let's do some average stuff. The average American actually has an insulin of about 12 and a fasting glucose of 115. So if we multiply the two of those and divide by 405, you'll get a number of 3.32. Above 1.9 is an indicator of insulin resistance. Above 2.9 is significant insulin resistance. So the average American is in a significant insulin resistance response. As you can see, that's not a good thing. What are some other insulin resistance symptoms? Well, the answer is until you're too late, you really don't feel insulin resistance. That's the same with hyperglycemia. We go out and eat, let's say, candy, or we go out and have some ice cream, and you might feel just fine. But as we get further along, you start to get fatigued quickly after those happen, and you start to have all those other wonderful symptoms of varying changes of blood sugar, where you might get sweats, you might get dizzy, you might get thirsty. You just really don't feel well. So until those move along, where you have what's considered consistent hyperglycemia, you really don't feel anything. But it can still damage your organs, and it's still high enough to give you something known as acidosis, which is not a good thing either. So what is insulin resistance? Is it a separate disease? Well, not really. It's more of a state of physiology, or a syndrome. This precedes a more severe metabolic disorder, such as diabetes. It's significant because it leads to diabetes type 2, cardiovascular factors such as heart attack and stroke, obesity, lack of physical activity due to fatigue, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, otherwise known as NAFLD, gut dysbiosis, joint destruction, bone spurs, disc degeneration, so who doesn't have that, or degenerative disc disease, blindness, night blindness too, kidney failure, skin tags, rashes, and discoloration. I think that's enough. The standard of American care regarding blood sugar. This is part 3 in my blood sugar series. So if your blood sugar is tested at your annual doctor's visit, or once a decade for most, man, I'm calling you out, guys, and your fasting is good to go, you get a thumbs up from your doctor, or they call you and say, hey man, everything's okay. But please reread or listen to part 1 and part 2. If your A1C is above 5.7, or your insulin is above 10, or both, these are major risk factors, and they're potentially life-altering consequences in your future. Remember, a glucose reading, even the most unregulated diabetics, at some point will be normal. It'll be between that 98 or 90 or 85 and 99. We can't see insulin resistance or prediabetes really without a blood test, and that's required of an A1C or an insulin. And while there are other calculations and tests such as fructosamine and lactase dehydrogenase, I'll acknowledge those tests and defer to a future topic. For those with fasting glucose above 100, insulin above 10, A1C above 5.7, or a HOMA-IR score above 1.5, pay heed, because the risk of the following goes up exponentially and is probably the leading cause of these conditions for you: Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, cancers of all form, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, dysautonomia, that's like everything we talked above here, stroke, heart attack, pulmonary embolism, permeable membrane, or have you ever heard of leaky gut, leaky lung, leaky sinuses, leaky brain? That's permeable membrane issues, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver, which can turn to NASH syndrome, weight gain that you can't lose anything no matter what you do, thyroid disorders, gastritis, autoimmunity, skin tags, eczema, and others, and the list goes on and on. My point is, from the above, the markers for pre-sugar issues minus the diabetes, it's like 99% of the markers are the same. So keeping you in a pre-state, it's not enough because it's happening. And many of these end up in a syndrome, of which are like 2,700 syndromes. So you might have heard of chronic fatigue syndrome, cardiometabolic syndrome, NASH syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, polycystic ovary syndrome, short man syndrome. I like that one. Well, maybe not clinically the last one, but you get my point. And there are a lot of these syndromes. But when it comes to monitoring your blood sugar, if you take it traditionally, is your device accurate? Or did you get blood from the right spot? Did you take the second drop of blood? Did the food label say correctly sugar-free, or did they have a lot of hidden sugars that were actually in there? So here's a quick explanation of what the average blood sugar will be over 3 to 6 months with your A1C. That's a rough average, and it's about 98% accurate, so it's a pretty good way to take a peek at it. But if your daily blood sugar is 126, then your A1C will most likely be 6.0, which is too high. It's above 5.7. Ideally, we want to get to 5.4. And plus or minus 14 points will add a 0.5 or subtract 0.5 to your A1C. So if we're talking about 126, if you went up to 140, that'd give you a 0.5, and from 6.0 on your A1C, now you're 6.5. If you go from 126 down to 112, it gets you down to 5.5, much closer. It's a 0.5. So hopefully you can see that the average below 100 is a good thing for longevity and preventing all of these clinical diseases and syndromes. And if you have those, hopefully it slows down the process of reversal. So if your doctor is saying, and we have this as, that we've come across, the doctor has said anything below 140 is a good thing. There's really no science or studies to support those words. 140 fasting on average is 6.5, and 6.5 A1C is diabetes. We see it every day. And I will disagree on this, that this is not prevention, but instead waiting for the inevitable diabetic condition to come along and other blood sugar complications to arrive. I haven't in 24 years heard someone say to me, I just really can't wait for diabetes, and I'm working really hard to get it. But there are some people doing that. And I want to provide you with the information to help you make the best decision for you and your family. So I've created a chart that I've created over the past few decades. It correlates very well to A1C and average blood sugar. So in a perfect world, if your fasting glucose is 96 all the time, and then that will correlate to an A1C of being 5.0. And it goes up about 3 points for every 1. So if your fasting glucose on average is 99, your A1C will be 5.1. Now, longevity tests say that you want your A1C to be 5.4. So if we extrapolate that a little bit and we get to your fasting glucose at 108, that keeps your A1C around 5.4. If we extrapolate again another 3 points to get to 5.7, that's going to get us around 117. So your fasting glucose, average daily glucose, so if you have a glucose monitor, it'll go up and down when you eat and do everything, but it'll tell you what your average through the day was. That's what we're shooting for. Or if you're doing finger sticks and you're taking your average throughout the day, we want to get you below 117 first to get you out of prediabetes, and second to get you below 1.8 to get you into the longevity side of it. I hope this helps. I hope this gets rid of some of the myths that go along with what's my blood sugar and what should it be and what's my risk factor. Okay, this is part 4 in my blood sugar process, but here's the additional testing. Why do you need to know about the fastest growing disease syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. So if your blood sugar is elevated too long, that has an effect on how it can actually what's considered oxidize cholesterol, which causes scarring and inflammation inside the arteries. And we can measure this by blood tests. One of the tests we can run is high-sensitive C-reactive protein and homocysteine. Ramping up these fire starters is what leads to a long list, too long to continue with these diabetic and blood sugar handling situations. Now, again, an A1C over 5.7 has been shown to do this, but you're not diabetic. That's where I'm trying to get at this. You're not diabetic, but you're already having the problem start. Also, an insulin over 12, infections, toxins, exercising way too much or not exercising at all lead to oxidation. Elevated blood sugar over time can also have an effect on your healing time, meaning that if you get scratched or you get cut, it takes you longer to heal, or if you have surgery, it takes longer for you to heal. And often, this can also be like you got sick and somebody else in your family doesn't have blood sugar issues, they're going to get over an illness usually faster. So toenail health, hair growth, all get affected, including your natural bacteria, of whom you become close friends with throughout your entire life. This is known as your microbiome. Your microbiome needs a safe environment. Can't be too hot, can't be too cold, can't be too acidic, can't be too basic. It's just right. So think of Goldilocks as your microbiome. It has to be just right. And it has to be just right for them to perform their functions, such as hormone conversion, detoxification, digestion, and immune regulation. While probiotics are essential for your gut, they're just a minute part of the microbiome. When your microbiome gets hit from maybe you needed to take an antibiotic, maybe you have too much stress, maybe you don't sleep well enough, maybe you take a medication that affects your microbiome, because a lot of them really do. Maybe you have sugar imbalances which affect your microbiome. Your microbiome then in turn loses its integrity. One of these processes is called a metabolite known as TMA. Your microbiome normally breaks down excess TMA, which comes in food that are high in choline and L-carnitine, such as beef, eggs, and cold water fish. If your intestines start to leak, a permeable membrane, or more generally known as a leaky gut, from too high or too low sugar levels, more TMA is released. The liver, being your detoxification system and your detoxification organ, along with your kidney, has to clean up the TMAO. Now it's known as TMAO, and it goes to the liver, and then it sends out to the bloodstream and the kidneys to filter it out. So you will have more TMAO in your blood test when you're leaking, and that can be normal, but hopefully not too much. Elevation of TMAO, like homocysteine and LDL oxidation, have a 20-time fold in cardiovascular risk events when compared to cholesterol alone. So if your cholesterol is 100 or your cholesterol is 400, your risk factor really falls into 1. You have to go look at other pieces of that. What's your cholesterol triglyceride ratio? What's your LDL number? What's your HDL number? Better yet, what's your fractionation? By the way, those only get up to like a 6 times risk factor. LDL-ox, TMAO, homocysteine can be 20 to 24 times more important than just looking at cholesterol alone. So I just want to drive that home. Not a lot of doctors know about that, but they will at some point. So this is very worthy of me. So anybody over the age of 25, these are things we want to take a look at. TMAO also has the ability to make things more sticky, and so it has an increased risk for clotting and embolisms. The longer these physiological changes continue, the more damage is also going to occur as well. So for about 40% of the population, they're gaining weight more rapidly than they ever remember. And by the way, quarantine is over. So what do we have now? Sometimes additional evaluations and testing are needed. So in addition, with liver tests, we run what's called an ALT and an AST and an ALP, but we might also run a GGT and a uric acid because it tests the integrity of the liver. High uric acid, which is now considered above 5.5, even though most labs have it above 7.5 and they're only looking for gout. But above 5.5 is a positive test. It has an effect on blood pressure. It has an effect on postural dizziness. You might even have right abdominal tenderness or irritable bowel syndrome, or like every time you go to the bathroom and you go number 2, you feel like you're wiping forever. You could have gout, you could have elevated triglycerides, and these are all part of a condition that's known as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD. With NAFLD, your triglycerides are now replacing, triglycerides are particles of fat that circulate about your body, and eventually they're supposed to be put into the cell to help make energy. It's called lipogenesis. You're taking fat to turn it into sugar, and then you're making glucose to make energy to the body. So when these extra triglycerides are cruising around, and your liver can't process them or break them down, or better yet, they don't go into the cell, sometimes there's too much, or hormones that allow that to go into there aren't happening. They start to replace the liver cells. So you have elevated triglycerides with elevated blood pressure, with elevated A1C, with elevated sugar, with elevated insulin. It's there. And so this is where we get the beginning of NAFLD. And so when that happens, when you replace liver cells with triglycerides or fat, the liver cells are actually dying. So they put out more AST, more ALT. So we have an elevated liver enzyme count. I can't count the number of times individuals walk to my office and say, I have NAFLD. And I go, what does that mean? Well, the doctor said I had a fatty liver. Okay, what are you going to do about it? Today, the only answer I've heard is nothing, and there's not a drug for that. Well, guess what? There isn't a drug for it. And I get it. That's the world we live in. And that's my journey too. We have now linked my NAFLD to my NASH syndrome, to a liver toxic, to a medication I took for acne many years ago that unfortunately did destroy a significant amount of my liver. It destroyed my gut. It created autoimmune diseases, and added the fact that I overexercised. I created oxidation. I lost my reserve in what's called my resilience to thwart disease. Well, I was invincible in my youth. I didn't know that running ultramarathons in my teenage years and doing triathlons in my 30s and staying up and just working and doing whatever I needed to do to get done, and maybe working a night shift while I'm working another job and getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night just because I needed to as a dad. That killed me. And a lot of people do burn themselves. They burn the candle on both ends. And so that crashed me to a point of despair and hopelessness. So I get you. If you've been there, I'm there with you. So diet and exercise are hands down the most important part of NAFLD and NASH. But by the way, NASH is just more NAFLD. Here's the good part. They're both reversible. But keep in mind that NASH is one step closer to cirrhosis. And once you get to there, you might be put on a transplant list or at some point hospice care. The strategy for everyone is going to be different. So how we react to stress, how we react to food, how we react to sleep, environment, and other parts of life differently. And so goes our blood sugar. So the guidelines are very low sugar intake, which also translates to eating from home or your garden or home-raised meats. A Mediterranean diet minus the peanut and wine, or with lots of quality fats such as olive, avocado, and fish oil. You can see my podcast about this because most fish oils promote NAFLD instead of preventing it. And oh yeah, we get exercise in the form of high-intensity interval training, and this can be as short as 30 seconds or up to an hour, or you can do it 10 times a day, or you can do it 20 minutes or 20 seconds with alternate bouts of fast and slow. Literally, any form will do when it comes to high intensity training. You just have to do it. And you have to be able to wake up the next day and do it again. So if you've gone too far, you've stressed yourself out, you've gotten to oxidative stress, you won't recover. So don't do too much. So we like to have people start very slow and work their way into it. So what can you do at home to better understand how you react to blood sugar and insulin surges? This is part 5 in my blood sugar series. So let's say you're a typical new patient. You feel like crap most of the time, and this is what comes in our office, especially in a functional medicine office. You've been to 10 plus doctors, you spent $30,000 out of pocket, and you say to me, I have a few dollars left for my help. You need to help me get out of this budget, and I want it done in 2 weeks. Well, that's not fair to me or the other doctors who are last stop, but I get it because I've been in that boat too. I've gone to other doctors and go, I'm just kind of tired of being in this process, and I've spent so much money on doing it. I get it. That said, when somebody comes in and they've done all this, I have the advantage of finding out what didn't work or what wasn't explained, because I do see doctors actually do really good work, but they didn't explain to the individual. This process takes 3 months. And they, in their head, when they walked in to start the treatment, they expected it to be 2 or 3 weeks. But those, I mean, clinically, you're looking at the research of what goes on. When people do this for 3 months, they get this result. But in like 2 months and 2 weeks, they feel nothing. So if you haven't been explained to that, it gets a little frustrating. So sometimes it's the right stuff, and I feel bad for them because then they got to do it again, and that's just the way things go. But I get the benefit of seeing what didn't work and what did work, and hopefully try to see what we can do to phase it to completion. In other words, don't give up. If your doctor can't help you or they can't help you understand the process condition, first thing, ask them for more information. And 99% of your health happens away from the doctor's office anyway. It's not your doctor actually making you healthy. It's your doctor giving you some advice, or whether it's a medication or a supplement or a diet or an exercise, and you going home and executing that. You are responsible for that. So over the past 25 years, misunderstanding has been the main limiting factor to why people remain sick. And it's worth taking the time for longer visits. So even when I see my doctors, I ask for more time. I want to understand their tests. I want to understand their plan. I want to understand their treatments. Where are they getting from point A to point B, so I can go, okay, that makes sense to me. And I trust what you're doing, but I need to have it in my head that more or less I came to the conclusion too. So while finger sticks are important, especially for checking keto markers and ovulation and blood sugar, and by the way, if there's insulin surges, there may not be an ovulation that's perfect. But also ovulation can cause insulin surges, just a heads up. Hormone imbalances and food sensitivities, finger sticks, you can get different things from that. There's something in the market that makes a more profound difference in understanding physiology. So did you know that dairy, corn, gluten, and sugar are all inflammatory? Well, if you did, great, high five. You did your research. But did you know that they can inadvertently raise your blood sugar because they're inflammatory? So what's more confusing, so can healthy foods. So for me, I didn't have a food sensitivity to turkey. I didn't have a food sensitivity to peppers, and that's with running IgG, IgA, and IgM, those type of antibodies for food allergies, food sensitivities. There's a difference, and I have a podcast on that too. But they raised my blood sugar as if I was eating donuts and drinking Coca-Cola at the same time. I'm not kidding, like 250 points. What? So what I found out is by using a continuous glucose monitor, I could find what my body was really doing in processing foods. Well, if I eat, let's say, a 95% clean. I'm not perfect, but I do eat pretty clean. But why on the earth, other than my resilience of beating myself up for many years, why on earth am I getting a fatty liver? And we saw that, okay, I'll take more of this and I'll do more of that, and then it got worse. And knowing I was treating it, knowing that I was going to other doctors, and knowing we were getting in front of it, and I got worse. It's because I kept having these insulin surges. Well, why am I having insulin surges? It's what you eat. So you can be like me, eat clean, gluten-free, mostly dairy-free, have very limited alcohol on special occasions, exercise now less than you did before, but more efficiently with high intensity and time, take all the supplements you need to that follow in your blood test, and still have a blood sugar issue. That sucks. I was not happy. So what are you going to do? So if you have a few $100s, and that's all it really is to get the information you need to get to your health, get something called a continuous glucose monitor, and it can be very, very helpful to guide your choices. Now, hopefully by now you've seen a patch on somebody's arm, or they're scanning their phone after they've eaten, or you've seen an ad for a continuous glucose monitor, or CGM as they're called, and they're typically used for diabetics, but it's a great and immediate biofeedback for a non-diabetic as well. First, You don't want to be a diabetic. Second, you don't know how you're going to respond to life. For instance, I like coffee. I used to take, or used to use a fruit drum, whether it's stevia or monk fruit, and put it in there as a sweetener. And then I'd use several organic creams, even bulletproof, which like has nothing in there. It's just a powder form of a MCT oil. Nothing in my coffee has sugar, period. And I've been doing that for years, especially with knowing that I got into NAFLD myself. And then it went to NASH. And that was within the last 6 months. I recently had another CT, and it's like, oh, these things are progressing. And I'm like, what? So here I am going to the doctor, and who I see twice a year, and she's now referring me to a liver specialist, cardiologist, gastroenterologist, endocrinologist, rheumatologist. What the hell? Because NASH is a bigger deal. And really, until last year, I never really heard of it. So the particular CGM I use runs on Libre sensors, and they're kind of well known out there. But for me, it turns out certain coffees, certain creamers, and even something like stevia will take my fasting glucose, which might be 85 to 99, and in a matter of minutes it goes up to 200. Well, what does that do to my insulin? It raises it. And it hangs out there, not just for like an insulin spike that will go up for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. That hangs out there for 2 or 3 hours. So here I am doing, it didn't matter. Here I am doing AIP diet, which is autoimmune paleo, Whole30, shape reclaimed, fast mimicking diet, carnivore, Mediterranean, you name it. And if I was using any of these things, and I'm just using coffee as an example, here we have turkey and peppers and other things that come along. It didn't matter what diet I was on. There was this massive spike of blood sugar. And as that blood sugar came up, it might as well just gone to McDonald's, might as well just had, it would have been easier for me to explain it my blood tests look like I'm eating candy all day long, and I'm not. And even through carnivore, the only thing I had was meat. And there were certain meats that were still raising my blood sugar and keeping my insulin high. And so what I was seeing with, here I am as frustrated as some of the people who walk in my office. And I'm like, I know better, but nobody knows this. And we couldn't have tested for this. And we read flu sensitivities and didn't show this. And we ran blood tests and it didn't show this. But here I am getting a real-time response of how my body reacts to food, how they create inflammation, what it's doing to my insulin, what it's doing to my blood sugar. And these are things you're not really going to find in the literature. It's going to be a trial and error that you learn on yourself. And the things that shouldn't have affected my blood sugar, in the case of most of the people who walk in our office, and probably you too, is that it wreaks havoc on the rest of your body. So I'm adjusting accordingly with this, including supplements and pharmacy. We've got to do what we got to do. And I've read enough articles about pharmaceuticals and how they raise blood sugar too. So that's something we have to explain in our office. Hey, if you've got a medication, you got to see if it's going to spike that as well. and like sometimes allergy medications cause allergies, and sometimes blood sugar medications create blood sugar issues. That sucks. That's just, most people think that's just great. But this newfound knowledge with these CGMs can be a huge learning tool. And I might be motivated to let my children try it. I want to see if they know how this happens. Hey, was Dad correct on how your mood, energy, attitude sucks with your diet, and that you're a pleasure to be around when you eat clean, and you're not so fun when you don't? Hopefully for them, whether youthful and invincible choices like I had, catch up to them, or are they getting away for now? So I hope I can only educate them to do the right thing, and i.e. see my genetic predisposition, as we talked about for a while. So I've documented everything in this process, including secondary non-response regarding digestion, skin, sleep, swelling, overall destruction of my skeletal system. There's a whole issue with that too. But what I do know in the training that I've done, running blood tests every 6 to 8 weeks, consulting the best doctors in the country, and about 24 diagnoses, some that stuck, and what's going on with somebody who just thinks this is aging and they push on day in, day out. There's so much more. There have been many days in the past year, or the past 4 years, I've considered just stepping away. I feel bad. And then certainly my stamina is not the same, and certainly I work way less hours than I used to. I've never liked the idea of not being able to finish something. For me, it's finishing my health journey right now, and that means I'm helping other people with their health journey. I've never liked just backing out. I didn't like to get into a race unless I trained properly, and I for me, I thought I'd trained properly for this to understand what's going on, and it turns out I didn't know enough. So in our office, we had to rearrange my schedule to be at maximum energy and maximum brain function. Because, for instance, if somebody comes into a doctor and the doctor hasn't slept for 10 days or whatever, they're not on. They're not on. It doesn't matter where you go. You anywhere, and somebody hasn't slept or isn't taking care of themselves or feels like junk, they're not on. And so I don't think it's fair for individuals to come see me if I'm not on. I have to be on. And so we reduce my exposure and my time that I have to be in the office to get maximum energy, maximum brain function. And then at the same time, even during the day, I watch my heart rate, my blood pressure, my heart rate variability, my oxygen, and other markers, so I know I'm not crashing, because I have to build this energy back so that my body can reverse this thing that's happened. I'm guesstimating that because of this, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is going throughout the entire United States and world, that we have about 10 years in this country before we won't be able to have transplants for liver, heart, kidneys, etc., because there will be too many people that need them and too few quality donors to donate. So we have two choices. You can get in front of this thing with yourself and your family, or pray that you have great odds in playing the transplant lottery. I'm Dr. Alan Trites. Be well.
This podcast, Great Health Does Not Have to Be a Mission Impossible, provides you information about evidence-based strategies for Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, gut health problems, digestion, autoimmune disease, brain health issues, and many other chronic health conditions. If you enjoy this podcast, you can find more information on today's episode, nutrition, Dr. Trites' blog, and many other topics at choosenewleaf.com. There you'll have all the information, and thank you for listening to this podcast. The best thing to do is sign up for his newsletter, where he'll update you on the latest research and clinical strategies related to chronic and autoimmune health conditions. You can find Dr. Trites' social media on Instagram and Facebook with the username New Leaf Health. This podcast is for general informational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice. Note: no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of this information and materials linked to the podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not delay or disregard obtaining medical advice for any medical conditions they have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.